So welcome back. I'm Carmelo De Maria, one of the organizers of this school. I hope you are enjoying the school, and just some small information before moving forward. All the slides that we are presenting will be uploaded on the virtual platform that you have been invited to last week. We also include all the documentation on the Ubora platform. Right now there is like a small problem with the certificate, but you can skip the control on the security. It's safe. It's a safe website, so you can have access to all the platform and its documentation. So this is just a couple of details. Now we can go with this presentation that has the aim to introduce you to the regulation of medical devices with a global perspective. The presenter of this school, actually, the original presenter was one of our PhD students. Now she's working for a company. Now she has some duties, so she cannot be here. And I was her supervisor, so I'm glad to explain you some details regarding medical device regulation. So the first question that I'm inviting you to find an answer is, what is a medical device? So consider that all these things are a medical device. So we have stethoscope, we have walking frame for children or for elderly, we have electronic devices like AED, we have sensors for blood glucose. We have also machines for analyzing the blood. We have pregnancy tests. Condoms are medical devices. So what is a medical device? Any suggestion? If you have to define a medical device. It's not easy. It's not an easy question. What is a medical device and how to explain what your device will do. But it's extremely important in order to keep safe the population. As you learned this morning, health is wealth and wealth is health. So each country has to regulate the market of the medical devices in order to have only safe products on the market. So according to the medical device regulation that we have in Europe, this is a definition of what a medical device is. So is instrument, apparatus, appliance, even a software can be a medical device. So it doesn't matter what physically a device is. It can be also something virtual, but have these purposes that are diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment of diseases, disability. You can also provide examination. The important thing is that you will perform this activity only through physical means. If you are performing this activity through pharmacological or immunological or metabolic interaction with the human body, this is not a medical device. It's something else. We will discover in probably you will discover that these are drugs or ATMPs, so advanced therapies medicinal product, but not a medical device. And this is extremely important. So if you want to explain to people what a medical device is, and you should explain us what your technology, the technology of your project, how this can be defined as a medical device, you have to explain which is the intended purpose. The intended purpose of the CT scan is to visualize the internal organ or the internal part of the body. Thermometer is something that helps you to evaluate the temperature, okay? So it's not a matter of the contact with the human body, but you need to explain the functionality. So it's the functionality that makes the device. So for this reason, if you have implants that are in contact with the body, such as hair rings or jewelries, these are not medical devices. think about the way these devices can be. Oh, one thing, research not aimed to marketing of the device cannot be defined as a medical device. What does it mean? This is a very tricky point for many of us who are performing research in the medical field or in the biomedical field. So what I'm going to explain you in this presentation is when you want to go into the market, okay? Regulation are important when you go into the market, not when you do research, but we are not doing our job for joke. So we want to have an impact on the people. So it's extremely important that since the beginning of your research, you have clear in mind the specification of your device in order to reach the market, not because you want to make money, you can also have to make money, but because you want to have an impact on the life of the people. So keep in mind this regulation in order to reduce all the efforts that you have to perform if you want to go in contact with patients, okay? This is extremely important. So how to interact with the human body? You can have implant or non-corporeal interaction, so software. Can be temporary or permanent, acute or chronic. You can exchange substances or you can exchange energy. So there are multiple types of interaction. Regardless the type of interaction or the time of interaction, it's important that your device is safe and effective. Okay? This is what a medical device is, and this is something that you can find in any regulation that we have in this world. Okay? Quick question. How much does it cost to go onto the market for a device, a simple device? Let's say a device that exposes the patients to low to moderate risk. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Who is for 1? 1. Who is for the second? And if you have any problem with who is for the third? 4th? Oops. The third one. This is like the study is pretty old, but the cost more or less according to the change of the value of the money can be the same. But why, according to you, you need this huge investment? So the problem is that the life cycle of a medical device is a very long process. Usually we used to work in this area, from concept and development. Then you have to think that you need to fabricate the device, multiple copies, and the change in the design from this point to this point is huge. Think about to find a way to produce, I don't know, 10,000 copies of your device equal. We are struggling to build our prototype in the lab, and the first prototype is completely different from the second and from the third, even if they are based on the same blueprint. Consider it to make multiple copies of the same device. How does it cost? And then you have to package and labeling. Then you need to promote your device, sales, use, and then disposal. And this is really important, much more important in this moment in which we are discovering the impact that our devices are having on the environment. Surgical masks are not a medical device, even if they are surgical masks are medical devices. Actually, I was thinking about the face protecting mask. They are not medical devices, are personal protective equipment, and more or less the regulation is similar, but surgical masks are medical devices. Think about how many surgical masks are produced and how many of them you can find in the street. So think about the problem of disposal. And a very good design have to start thinking about disposal since the beginning. Here we have the word stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders, technically? Who can be defined as a stakeholder, according to you? Stakeholders are people who can have interest in what you are doing. So in this case, we have manufacturer, so people that are fabricating the device, that are the main responsible of the respect of the wall, of the regulation of the wall life cycle, but you have vendors, you have users, patients, doctors, clinicians, even government is a stakeholder of the medical device life cycle. So to ensure the quality of this path, we have this high cost. For high-risk product, the cost is 3 times more or less. The regulation that we have right now, so think about that someone asks you to write a regulation for all the devices that I presented before, are completely different each other. Some of them are based just on mechanical features, such as like a crutch or a walking frame. Some of them are pure software. Some of them are devices that will never be in contact with the human body, but also with tissues. Think about the devices for blood analysis. So regulators had to find a way to write something that is universal, that you need to, let's say, update every year because technology will evolve. So they had to find a way to classify all the devices according to a parameter. Medical devices are classified according to the risk they expose the patients. In the medical device regulation, you can find a list of rules that allow you to classify the device in low risk device, medium risk device, more or less, and high risk device. According to what? According to the type of contact that you have with the body, according to the duration of this contact, according to the energy that you are exchanging. Okay, there are some indication. I'll show you where you can find this information in the European medical device regulation that is, for us, our point of reference. We are living in Europe, but it's one of the most advanced medical device regulation that we have in the world. And you need to demonstrate that you are doing the things well, okay? And the regulation will help you in this process. Thinking about safety, we don't have to think only about the safety of the patient. We think about the safety of all the people are involved in this cycle. So not only the patients, but also the healthcare providers. Many times you have to think also about the bystanders. Think about if you have a medical implant that have inside some, how to define them, specific atoms that are going to have a decay, like creating some electromagnetic energy. You are exposing to the risk the bystanders, okay? So an efficient regulation system have to guarantee the safety for patient and worker, but also think about the importance of this regulation in your life. This is a story that happened to a friend of mine 2 weeks ago. She went to do some blood examination, and then they found a very low number of blood cells, red blood cells. I mean, we did this test in Italy. We are considered a rich country, and there was a mistake in the machine. So in the good hypothesis, she has a tumor, okay? So her life for 3 days was a nightmare. The life of her mother was a nightmare. The life of her husband was a nightmare. So this because the machine was not well calibrated, okay? Think about your life, how it can change if there is no an efficient regulation system to keep the nurses in the good path. This an efficient regulation system also allows to have a fair competition and promote innovation. Now, if we give a look to the medical device regulation around the world, we can say that most of the countries have a regulation. What is the problem? Is that the regulation is not the same. So we have regulation in Europe, the one that I presented you, this medical device regulation applied by European Parliament and recognized automatically by the Italian government and the government of the various member states. But we have regulation in China, 1 billion people, if you want to go in that market. We have regulation in Japan. We have regulation in the United States, and I put this forth because this in these areas, you have the producer of the majority of the medical device in the world. Recently, also India is going to enter in this market in a very deep way. Currently, India is very focused on the production of drugs. Practically, the half of the drugs that are used in the world, especially in Africa, are produced in India. This idea is that in the coming years, the India as a producer of medical device will get much more importance. But right now, these agencies regulate the market of their areas, but in a certain way, they regulate the market also outside that area. So let's go in detail on how a regulation is built. So zero risk is impossible. Okay, this is important to know. There is always a certain number of risks. We have to act in a way that can minimize the risk. Given the extremely variety of the devices, you cannot find technical details of all the devices inside a single regulation. Otherwise, you need an encyclopedia that needs to be updated every year. And there is no space for new devices or new technologies because there is nothing in the regulation. So how the regulation can keep the pace of technological innovation? Demanding to the use of standards or technical norms. So in the regulation, you can find how to keep the device safe and effective, and at a certain point say, please consider the relevant standard of your device. And among the relevant standards, they suggest some of the standards that can be followed to say, okay, I'm compliant with the regulation. Oops. These are the main difference between standards and regulation. So, regulation is a law. If you don't respect the law, you go in jail. This is the most important difference between a standard and a regulation. The use is mandatory. It's available to the public. If you go online and look for medical device regulation, you can have the entire regulation free to download, print, and do whatever you want. It's developed by a public authority. And let's say demands two standards the technical specification. So you cannot find into the regulation how much is the voltage to keep your device safe. In the regulation, say you have to make your device safe and effective. Please consider the use of the relevant standard to make this effective and safe. So standards are recommendation, let's say are instruction, are suggestion. The use is voluntary. You can make a very good device even if you don't follow the standard. It's extremely difficult to make something good with very high performance without following the standards. But it is possible. The problem is that regulators say, okay, if you want to make something different because there are no standards related to your devices, so new technology that is so up to date that there are no standards, then you have to find a way to demonstrate the device is safe and effective in any case. If you want to make like a crutch without following a standard, and this is like a specific standard on how to develop a crutch, then it's on you and on the budget of your company to demonstrate that the test that you follow it or the methodology you follow it to design the crutch is equivalent to the standard. Okay? So this is the way. If you don't want to follow the standard, you have to demonstrate that your methodology, your design is as good as the standard. So it's better to follow the standard, it's easier. It's available to the public, but you have to pay. Usually the standards used to cost, from 200 euros and above. It depends. Many of them, you need a family of standards. For many of us, we have access to standards thanks to our institution. So check with the library of your institution how to get access to the standards. They are based on technological results, and they are updated by some standardization bodies every 5 years, usually. Legislation instead have a longer time of approval. Our previous regulation, so the current regulation in Europe is of 2017. The previous one was from 1993. So you were not born in 1993. But we had the same regulation until 2017. Okay, we are on time. So let's give a look to the three main parts that you can find in all the regulation. First of all, you need a pre-market analysis. Pre-market means before going to the market. You need to define your device. If you want to develop like a crutch, so my device is a device able to sustain a person in walking. So this have to be written. Okay? Why? Because if someone is not using properly your device, so someone is using your device to do something else, you are not responsible. The example that probably make you understand, so the thermometer is the device used to evaluate the temperature of the human body. Then you can use the thermometer also, to clean your air. But if you damage your air during this procedure, I'm not responsible, because I told you that you have to use the device only to evaluate the temperature, not for cleaning purposes, okay? So this is the first point. Then you need to classify the device according to the risk, because according to the risk class, you have a certain number of documents to present to the authority in order to go into the market. And then you need to demonstrate that your device is safe and effective. Okay, there are some requirements. It's a list of requirements and say, okay, I need to demonstrate this. this. So I demonstrate that my device is biocompatible thanks to an ISO standard on biocompatibility. I demonstrate that my device, I reduced the risk thanks to the standards on risk management. I demonstrate that my production line is efficient and high quality thanks to this ISO standard, and so on and so forth. So you have a list. It's a sort of checklist, no more than that. Then when you go on the market, this is another huge story. We are not very interested in this, but I hope that many of you in 10 years will work in a company or will have your own company to go into the market, but you need to register your company in the device. So you have to produce some documents. And then there are many cases in which you are importing medical devices from foreign countries, or you are exporting to foreign countries. So you need to have, in many countries, the person responsible of this procedure. And then finally, and this is a very tricky point and important for getting data, you need to observe the market, survey the market actually, post-market surveillance. So you need to keep track on that if the things are going good or wrong about your device. If your device will fail, you need to know why, when, and with. So all the question regarding the failure rate. Currently, the European system is creating a huge database. It's called EUDAMED, for collecting all this information about medical devices. Still not in place, but they ask you for a code in which you can keep track of all the devices that we have on the market. So let's give a look to our regulation. We have, and I'll share with you the slide about the European regulation, the American regulation, the Chinese regulation, and the Japanese regulation. We are not to follow all of them in detail. It's not the idea of this school, just to show you some essential principles. So first of all, we have two regulations, one for medical devices. And this regulation substituted the previous directive 93/42 and 93/85. They have different names. So this is a regulation, this is a directive. The main difference is that regulation was approved by European Parliament, and all the member states took this regulation without essentially any change. This directive were a sort of, let's say, we can say a sort of indication, and then they have to be approved by the member state, but they can decide also to not approve the directive, okay? Right now we have a single market, and you will understand probably the story of European Union. If you think about it, now we are trying to be a community. Previously, we were a market, okay? We were born as a place where we can sell stuff without any limit. Now we are trying to grow up as a community. It's a different, but we still have this heritage, thinking about that we are a single market, okay? And this regulation has to be think about a regulation to regulate the market of the European Union. Okay, this is really important. And then we have another regulation, is for in vitro diagnostic. So those devices that will not be in contact directly with the patients, but with the tissue of the human body to be analyzed and provide indication. The test for pregnancy is an in vitro test. The test for COVID is an in vitro diagnostic, okay? The test for malaria is an in vitro diagnostic. And so these regulations were approved in 2017, so now 5 years ago, and for a certain period, 3 years in this case and 5 years in this case at the beginning, both the directive and the regulation were working together. Right now, we have only the regulation in this case and this case. We are in 2022. Consider that due to COVID, the period in which both regulations were still working together was extended for 1 year and something, okay? But right now, this is the only one that we have. And also this one right now, from May 25, if I remember well. So as I explained it before, the medical device regulation do pre-market, post-market, and placing on the market activities, regulates all these aspects. One thing is important. Who is controlling the process? Who is in charge for controlling that you are doing the things well? Any suggestion? Any experience? In the European Union, you can commercialize any product in the European Union. Any product, I mean, from clothes to toys to cars to medical device, to be on the market needs to have the CE mark, okay? The authority that will give you the CE mark is called notified body. Okay, the notified body is a private company controlled by the central authority of each state and European Union that has the power to give you the CE mark, and it's the same company that come to your let's say production facility, come to your headquarters and check all the documentation. The controls are much more detailed according to the risk. Higher is the risk, higher is the number of controls. Lower is the risk, lower is the number of controls. For some specific classes of medical device, you can put by yourself the CE mark. However, you need to be ready to demonstrate that you did the things good. So all the documentation, instead to be presented to the notified body, you have to keep them into your offices, but be ready to show to the authorities in case something is going wrong. Oops. So if we go online and download the regulation, you can see that there are various parts. In the first part, we have why. So they explain why they did the regulation. Okay, it's very interesting. If you want to read, you can learn many things about the motivation, why you need to regulate the market, and how this regulation grew up. Then you have 10 chapters divided in 123 articles that explain all the process from the definition of the medical device and the scope of the medical device. So define the limit of your device, on how to place the CE mark, economic operators, reprocessing, who are the notified bodies, how to perform clinical evaluation and investigation, so on and so forth. And then you have Annex 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The most important are Annex 1, in which you have a list of requirements for being safe and effective. Annex 2, in which you have the indication on how to create your medical device dossier. And Annex 8, in which you have all the criteria, all the rules to classify your device from low risk to high risk. So let's move forward and give a look to the classification criteria. Why it is important. if you go on the Annex 8, and you have to do this during these days, and the Ubora platform will help you in performing the classification in an automatic way. You just reply to yes or no question. There are some questions that allow you to evaluate medical devices that are invasive, medical devices that are not invasive, medical devices that are active, medical devices that are not active. There are specific rules that have been included during the later stage of the approval of this regulation, specific for devices such as breast implant or devices such as automatic external defibrillator. So these rules allow you to define 4 classes from low risk to high risk. We have 4 classes called class 1, 2A, 2B, and class 3. So here we have wheelchairs, stethoscope, spectacles. Then you have 2A, think about surgical clamps. They expose to a higher risk the patient with respect to spectacles. Class 2B are more risky. So here you have condoms, lungs ventilators, box and bone fixation plate. Then you have class 3. In case class 3 will not work, for sure your patients will die. This is the easiest way to understand why they are classified as class 3. Think about, an earth valve, mechanical earth valve. If it is going to fail, your patients will die in a few minutes practically. So, for all the devices, you can find a rule. The best is to read all the rules before classifying your device. And there are now some specific rules for nanomaterials, for example. So keeping pace to the technology, here you have specific rules for nanomaterials. So without going in detail, because we don't have a lot of time and I don't want to go too long, once you classify your device, you have to start filling this technical documentation. This technical documentation is composed by many parts. Look, you have device description, so you have the description on how your device is going to work. You have the description of the scope, purpose, intended users, intended patients, conditions, warnings. You have the risk class. So all the information that I explained to you before now have to be included in this technical documentation. And then you have all the things that usually you put in your thesis. Think about the design, think about the test, think about the results. You have to present all of them in the correct way. The way is written in Annex number 2. A couple of points regarding the standards. In the European Union, we have 2 authorities called CEN and CENELEC that are offices of the European Union for standardization. Probably you know ISO standards, okay, or CEN standards. IEC standards. IEC 60601 is one of the most common. You know, ISO 13485. So these names are pretty familiar. Even if ISO 9000. So these names are pretty familiar. So ISO and IEC are international standard organization in which people from, let's say, the whole world are participating in writing these standards. In Europe, we have CEN and CENELEC. More or less, you can see ISO, CEN, IEC, CENELEC, 1-to-1. but they are working all together. And in the European regulation, it's written that if you follow the standards endorsed or provided by CEN or CENELEC, and these standards are called harmonized standards, it's sufficient to demonstrate that the device are compliant to the regulation. Okay, this is the most important thing. Usually the standards provided by CEN and CENELEC are the same of the one produced by ISO with one page more. Okay, it's the same standard with one page more. For example, now we are in Italy. In Italy we have, if you go on technical norms, you can find UNI and ISO, blah, blah, blah. UNI is the Italian National Institute for Standardization that endorsed the standards endorsed by the European Union, EN, that endorsed the standards provided by ISO. So UNI and ISO, blah, 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 is the same standards with three pages more. One for Europe, one for Italy, and one is the original, okay? EN ISO 13485, Quality Management System. These are the most important harmonized standards. 14971, Risk Management. Standards regarding the labeling or safety of medical equipment. You have to get familiar with these standards, and I think you will get familiar much more in the coming days, but also in your life. Regarding the risk class, coming one slide back, according to the risk class, you need to have an approval from notified body for classes that are high-risk devices, includes high-risk devices. Instead, for classes with low-risk device, you can go for self-assessment, but it's important that you keep all the documentation. But for some specific devices that are called class 1 for measurement, such as thermometer, or class 1 including sterile element, you need anyway the approval from notified bodies that is not coming to check each device, but only some features of your production line. In this case, it's going to check if your sterilization system is working or the physical principle of your device is correct or not, and the way you calibrate your device. 1 second, I can see one question from the chat. I will try to reply in a few minutes. Let's keep all these things. Let's go to this device that are very common in our research field. Right now, many of us are working with tools that allow to design and to produce medical devices that are specific to patients. We do personalization of medical devices. Is there any space for such devices in the regulation? Yes. These are called custom-made. So custom-made medical devices are devices that are produced specifically for specific patients. So they will not work if applied to another patient, and you need let's say, the patients, you design the device onto the patients. You need a medical prescription, but being that device unique, you don't have the CE mark because you don't go into the market. You don't have a shelf when you have device 1, 2, 3. You have a single device produced under the indication of a clinician, and you fabricate this for the patients, okay? This is called custom-made. Keep attention, there is another name that is customized. Okay? Customized means that I take a device from the shelf, I change some parameters, and I adapt it to a patient. This is a standard medical device. Okay? The difference is that if you go, so think about, you have a fabric, you go to a sailor and say, please make me a suit. This is a custom-made medical device. If you go to Zara, buy a jacket and you adjust, the device, the jacket, that is customized. Okay? This is the difference. These are custom-made. Without the patients, you cannot produce them. Okay? A prosthetic hand adapted to the human body is customized. And here you have some specific example. There is space for this in all the regulation of this world. Just to move forward, let's keep about US. You can find this on the slide. You can see different ways you can classify. In China, for example, you have to follow Chinese standards. In Japan, there are some other specific rules, but anyway, more or less, if you go everywhere in the world, you can find a classification based on standard. So it's important to think about the risk. Some cases you have 3 classes, some cases you have 4 classes, but if you merge class 2A and 2B, probably you will finish in class 2 of the US. There are some small differences. Global Harmonization Task Force, that was born with the idea to harmonize the regulation, suggested 4 class A, B, C, D, that is essentially equal to the one that you have in Japan. Anyway, the question is, what about low and middle income countries? What they are doing? Any idea? So the most important point is that we performed a sort of a survey in the countries of ABEC, so African Biomedical Engineering Consortium, and also searched for other countries where we don't have any people inside the countries to help us in this research, but the majority of them have a regulation, but there is a lacking capacity to apply the regulation. And this lack is due mainly to the fact that there are not so many companies producing locally the devices. The majority of devices are imported. Okay? The majority of these countries are using the European regulation as a point of reference. And if you can commercialize the product in Europe, they accept this as a way to demonstrate that the device is safe and effective, and you can commercialize this in the specific country. Okay? This is the case for Egypt, for example. Okay, let's move forward and arrive at the end. I want to thank you. Actually, we have 10 minutes for questions, more or less. Okay. I start to reply to the person that is online. I have a question. Are the same medical device regulation 746 applicable to technologies? In detail, if I work on a tomographic reconstruction algorithm, not a wall medical imaging scanner, should I perform risk? Yes, okay. The software analyzing data coming from the medical, huge medical equipment can be considered as a medical device. And you have to apply the regulation 746. Okay, it's for in vitro diagnostic. No, let me check. No, it's 745. So 745 is not analyzing the tissue. So CT scan can be considered as a medical device, 745, I mean. And for sure, you need to demonstrate the device is safe and effective, even if it is a software. So you need to perform the risk assessment, you have to have good quality management software, and so on and so forth. When does a regulation become an obstacle to biomedical development? I have to say that if, in case you consider the regulation an obstacle, probably you want to skip some control. So let's make an example. During the recent COVID-19 pandemic, many people try to build their own facial respirators. They try to build their own face mask. People try to use, I don't know, the paper that you put in the oven to place on your face. People try to 3D print mask. I mean, I don't want to stop the research at all. I was one of the people try to find a way to clean the mask or to decontaminate the mask. But at a certain point, if you cannot demonstrate that it's safe and effective, it's a risk to give this to people. Think about this. If one person will die, if your device is not safe and effective, it's a huge problem. So it's not a limit in technological development. It's, let's say, a challenge to innovators to do the things right. This is my honest opinion. And if you consider standards and regulations since the beginning of your research, probably you can have better results at the end, or for sure, you will reduce the time to market. Just to make a quick example, you need to know that there are some color code if you want to use LID. You cannot use purple LID or pink or whatever you want. You have green, red, and yellow, and there are some specific indication in which you have to use green or red or yellow. If you start to change color code, then you have to come back and redesign your software or your hardware. A question, please. May I recognize a wearable like a smartwatch as a medical device? Should I show that the parameters are similar to gold standard, make a research study? Okay. The medical device is a device that is used for doing diagnosis, for doing therapies, and so on and so forth. In case you're not using the data, if they are coming from the best smartwatch that we have right now for medical purpose, you don't need to certify this as a medical device. This means that if someone is using the data taken from your iWatch for doing diagnosis, Apple is not responsible in case your data are not correct. Okay, this is the most important thing. No one is ensuring you that you have the correct data. So no doctors will base a diagnosis based on data that are coming from a device that is not certified. So I'm not saying that the data are not correct. I'm saying simple that no one is responsible of the quality of data, so data are not useful for a diagnosis. So if you want to use this for research, devices used for research are not medical devices. They are not under this regulation. If you are using the ethical approval of your university usually. So anyway, you need to demonstrate that the device is at least safe. And usually you can perform this study on healthy volunteers easily. In case you go on patients, it's difficult that someone gives you the approval if this is not a medical device. I hope I replied to the question. Yes?
How long does it take to develop new standards?
And new standards?
Yeah, technology
as far as I know, I saw some development of some standards regarding to 3D printing. It took about 10 years. And then they are updated every 5 years. But in case there are some requests, they can, let's say, do every 3 years. But I have to check. But more or less, 10 years is the time in which they pass all the steps.
Okay. So as more like of the wearable technologies are coming out now, it will still be like 5 to 10 years until there's perhaps specific standards for.
But I mean, even if you don't have a specific standards on these devices, this doesn't mean that you cannot use, you cannot have a medical device based on wearables. You need only to demonstrate that they are safe and effective. So if the data coming from your watch evaluating the glucose concentration are equal to the one that you can take with, I don't know, the stick, it's okay. The standards are mainly used to facilitate the development, I don't know, of spare parts, because you know that the device is compliant to that standards. I can produce spare parts for that standard, so you know that it's working because it respect some standards. And in case of wearable, this is, however, my own experience. I have some friends having insulin pump that are controlled by some sensors that are based on a watch, and they can communicate. The standards for let these devices communicate each other are not working. So each company is developing its own standards. Probably they will take time, as they took time for having a single charger, to force them to use the same protocol.
So that then you can compare between as well with the same process.
The way you can compare, yes, is this one. But usually when right now these devices are compared to the gold standard, that probably in case of glucose concentration is, I mean, the stick of the blood analysis.
Thank you.
So guys, 2 minutes before the time. So thank you for your time.